What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions or my early access impressions for Solasta 2. Now this video is going up on the 11th. Early access for this game begins on the 12th, tomorrow. That is obviously possible because I was given early access to it along with at least a few other creators by Kepler Interactive and Tactical Adventures. This is a game I've been looking forward to since it was announced, as I enjoyed Solasta 1, but it was definitely a game that was rough around the edges in a lot of places. The character models and voices were, let's say, not exactly great, and from the early access, that's probably some of the stuff you'll notice straight away is just how much the presentation of those things has improved, while simultaneously keeping the focus on being very rules as written 5e D&D. This time around with the 2024 rule set changes, mind you, but the idea holds, and yet at the same time, something that they did with Solasta was a lot of iterative campaigns where they focused on things like choice and consequence and building out what the main campaign lacked, and you can feel a lot of that progress and learning in Solasta 2 even here and now. But from there, let's go ahead and talk a little more specifically about this, and I want to kick it off by talking about what early access actually entails versus what it is going to be later. Most aspects of the game will be expanded upon over the course of, again, the sort of early access period, but what is in right now are 4 ancestries or races, 6 classes, 13 subclasses. You can multi-class, though the level cap is only 4. You can explore more or less all of Act 1, which is like, 10-ish hours. Explore the world map, check out like encounters and secret things to find. It's all fully voiced and everything. And there's a good chunk of content to experience and get an idea of what this game is going to be. Now, what is going to come later are additional ancestries, classes, increased level cap, the multiplayer component. It's not in there for early access launch, but it will come later. They'll also be expanding on the faction system and crafting and the like. I'll be covering all of that stuff in future updates, of course, but that's kind of where the early access period stands right now. While that's all well and good, how is this running straight out of the gate? I was a little curious about how this was going to go, and I'm actually still curious about how it's going to look when they open it up to everybody and they can get feedback on more than just a singular set of hardware. But a lot of that curiosity came from the fact that they are using Unreal Engine this time around. The first game was made in Unity, and at least as of right this second, the only real issue I ran into was the occasional texture pop in one particular scene. It was especially egregious where the whole floor was missing, but that was really about the only problem I ran into. However, they did mention in the one pager they sent over that most problems that could pop up should be able to be solved with a simple save and reload kind of situation. Something to keep in mind either way, however. Next up, let's talk a little bit about character creation. I do want to mention here that I put out a video not too long ago going over this character creation in full, that is to say the character creation from this bit of content. So it is exactly the one you'd be having access to at early access launch. So the main thing I want to mention in this video is just to point out how very improved the character models have been. They've done a lot of stuff cosmetically to hopefully make characters you actually want to play in terms of looks. But I think they've also done some cool stuff with the UI and explaining exactly where certain bonuses are coming from, which to somebody like myself who's not wildly familiar with the 2024 rule changes, I did find helpful. But do keep in mind, again, mechanically, classes, ancestry, all that is going to be expanded later. Right now, you've just basically got halfling, dwarf, human, and elf, and then you can also be a fighter, rogue, cleric, sorcerer, wizard, or a paladin. Each of those except cleric will have 2 subclasses. Cleric will actually have 3, and all of that is getting expanded later. Now let's talk a little bit about the main campaign, which is pretty much all that's available right now. So when you click on the main campaign, the first thing you'll do is make your party of 4. It's important to understand that you are playing the party of 4, not an individual character, though you will actually apparently be picking up some other characters along the way. When you make this party, you'll notice that they are all members of the same family, the Colewall family. This is because that is relevant to the main campaign's story. Now, I am going to talk story setup here, and while I wouldn't consider that a spoiler because I'm just setting up what the main campaign is about, I realize that some people might consider that a spoiler, and maybe you want to go ahead and skip past this part then. The game kicks off with our 4 family members here heading to a funeral of their adopted mother, a priestess and servant of the goddess Mariki, I believe her name is, something like that, and her husband adopted all 4 of you unlikely siblings in addition to their 2 other children. You are going to bury your mother after she kind of suddenly passed away. Along the way, you're going to meet with the two biological children of your adopted mother, Diorcus and Rick, or Rickard to give him his full name, but they call him Rick in game, which I thought was pretty funny. Both of these characters were also servants of Mariki, but as you'll notice very, very quickly, the death of their mother has affected them both very differently. Diorcus immediately tries to crash the funeral, summons in monsters to fight these corrupted versions of a race that are called Cyclists, which I am still hoping get added to the playable races, but we'll see what happens. But Diorcus tries to resurrect her mother, and it does not go well, and in fact, so much so that their goddess intervenes, and outright stops this from happening, and when Diorcus sort of rejects her chosen duty, it falls to you to take up that mantle and continue a mission your mother was trying to accomplish of some pilgrimage that is a little vague on details. After this happens, you are teleported to a place known as Neokos with both Diorcus and an injured Rick after the battle. Diorcus fully rejects her goddess at this point, feeling very much betrayed by the entire situation. And in fact, this is where it connects to some of the marketing we've already seen, because Diorcus specifically mentions that she has been in contact with somebody named Shadwin, which was the female character from all the initial marketing material, which I would assume is then how that character comes into play. So the bulk of this story is sort of twofold. Your adoptive sibling rejecting their faith and clearly becoming involved with the antagonist somehow, and then on your end, you also have to set out to complete this pilgrimage, which relates back to your goddess and the symbol, which is the sort of key art for the game, and the stuff we already know about Shadwin. Now, that's a pretty decent plot setup for the main campaign, but I will say the thing that struck me most was how good the voice acting was for characters like Diorcus, and I think they really, really nailed stuff like the rejection of her own faith, stuff like that, and it's just a huge improvement in quality that you see just straight away. And I'm hoping that's the thing that catches people the most in terms of the story and the narrative. Now, that's as much as I want to say here. We'll talk about the rest some other time, because next I want to talk a little bit about difficulty. Now, on the early access side of things, there's basically two difficulties, Explorer and Authentic. Authentic is basically the D&D rules as written experience, whereas Explorer is a little more forgiving. With that in mind, the original game had a bunch of modifiers you could tweak to adjust like individual bonuses and penalties to certain types of roles and just kind of get really granular with what you wanted to change, and my hope is that that is something else they continue to expand on, and I don't see why they wouldn't given the nature of the game and the system, but just figured I'd throw it out there. Next up, let's talk about the rest of this. So the intro is a decent chunk of Act 1, as you would probably expect, sort of tutorializing the player, setting up the big factions, that kind of thing. We find ourselves on the island of Neokos. We're quickly getting to grips with everything, the beacon being one of the more powerful entities here, but they are at, let's say, odds with people like the Argat Republic, the Wandering Nomad tribes, but it's pretty clear straight away that the beacon are like the main power, though they don't have the ability to take on everybody at once because they have trouble, at home, basically. And so they're in a sort of mutually assured destruction situation with the other factions where all of them fighting would be so devastating to both sides that it's probably not really worth it. And so they're trying to sort of diplomatically get a leg up on each other, as it would seem. Now you're going to get introduced to the other factions by them basically doing things to very clearly try to subvert the status quo here, and I thought that was especially interesting. But once you get out of the main city of Kaer Mar, you're free to explore the broader world. And that's some of what I want to talk about, the exploration and the world map. So the main campaign for Solasta 1 was incredibly linear. There were just set roads you would travel along, random events could happen, but that was pretty much it. The map here uses a hex-based system that we've talked about before, on this channel at least, and you get so many movement points per day. You can force march if you want to, but though that throws your characters into exhaustion and requires resting as you go, but you can set up the specifics of how you want the game to utilize your movement points and the like, but this is also affected by things like terrain, etc. Now, via these hexes, you are simply going to move hex to hex and potentially encounter random encounters, yes, but as you explore each individual hex you land on, you can uncover places to like fully explore, actual locations to dive into, permanent events that, as long as you go to that place, they are always there. Both text and, more explorable like side quest types of situations. And I think for this type of game, it's a pretty satisfying way to handle overland travel. I enjoyed it a fair bit, and probably one of the biggest aspects of that is that they're very clearly trying to go for expansion of what content is available. So for instance, I was able to fully pick up side quests. There was some choice and consequence there about how you wanted to deal with individual situations. That was something some of the DLC campaigns from Solasta 1 were dabbling in, so I'm not surprised to see it here, but I did just want to clarify. There is exploration and non-linearity to this, and at least in the early stages here, that seems pretty fun. Now, probably the most interesting thing to me that the game presents you with is the companions. So, companions seem to be members of factions that you will be able to take with you into your party. Now, there's a few things that they mentioned here. One, these characters can straight up die. If they die, you obviously can't do their quests and the like, and this is important because Solasta 1 and even Solasta 2 with your main party does require you to keep those characters alive, as you are, again, playing the entire party. The companions, on the other hand, while the one in early access will actually game over you if you die, they make it clear via a pop-up that will be changing. That is just a temporary thing for the early access period. And one thing that I'm definitely going to keep in mind over the course of early access and also for the full release of this game is how, involved are these companions going to be? They're clearly meant to represent a faction, so will there be a lot of back and forth with how they feel about your entire party, etc.? Because I know as soon as I mention some of this stuff, some people are going to talk about romances and stuff potentially, and I don't think that's something they'll do just from the basic setup and structure of the way your party works. And that's as good a time as any to mention some of that. So because you play the entire party, a lot of what your conversation options and whatnot wind up being are combinations of your character's personalities. One of the things you'll pick in character creation is the personality of your individual party members. This affects the tone and how they talk to people, etc. And that just in and of itself would make anything approaching romance, I think, very difficult to pull off. Now, the main campaign does add on to that system a little bit. Each of your 4 main party members takes on a role of the adopted family that they were in. The golden kid, the top student, the scapegoat, or the substitute, which is kind of like the leader, and all of those roles kind of favor specific personalities you can assign to these characters. So that'll be something to keep in mind for people, I would imagine. And while that is the case, do remember that when you're doing things like rolling dice for individual conversations, it picks the character that is best suited to make that role. What's more, on the companion side of things, those characters are going to level up by themselves. They'll be kind of scaled to whatever your party level is, but you won't have access to their inventory and specifics. So it doesn't seem like you can fully min-max them, mind you, but it looks like they'll be helpful in combat at the very least. A couple other interesting things I wanted to mention, mostly questions on my end, and that is backgrounds and languages. So we do pick backgrounds for our characters as well, kind of what they've been up to, and you get letters in your inventory for your mother's death and what sent you here, which I thought was a nice touch. But in Solasta 1, backgrounds also gave you a sort of personal quest, and given the nature of those letters, I do wonder if that's going to come up for our characters later in a similar fashion. And then there's the languages. Each of our characters picks languages and stuff they can learn. The spell comprehend languages is in there, and I did notice that all of the reading material you pick up does mention what language it is written in, and I do find myself hoping they really lean into that mechanic simply because I think it could be fun, and it's not exactly a mechanic tons of games make a use of. I have seen it here and there, but not super often. That brings us to combat though before we start wrapping up this impressions. So combat is more or less what you'd expect. Have you ever played 5th edition D&D? It's that, because what Solasta does is try to adapt that stuff, rules as written, into a video game, and it's very good at that. It's probably the best thing Solasta 1 did. And because of that, I'm not going to use my time here to talk just 5th edition D&D combat mechanics. I've actually made videos about specifically that, I guess, if you want, but a couple of notes. Pretty much every place that I had a combat encounter in does seem to be trying to play around with stuff like verticality. Now, there was certainly some of that in Solasta, mind you. That was especially interesting to me because of the switch to Unreal Engine, because while it didn't necessarily have a bunch of terrain like Solasta 1, this game does mess around a lot with things like verticality. You're in this big space, and that's important because with the switch from Unity to Unreal Engine, I know there were some questions about how they were going going to translate that. One of the really cool things about combat in Solasta was how the game handled like flying characters or all the different ways you could make use of the space you were having a combat encounter in. And while I don't have full access to that, because I don't have like full access to the classes and everything and all the abilities, etc., to test every little bit of it, it does seem like that was something they had in mind, because there's a lot of verticalities to the levels themselves, mind you, but we still get, all the abilities to like push and pull people off of ledges, use line of sight and higher ground to your advantage to sort of put a stop to enemies advancing, that kind of thing. And so those elements are here at least, and I'm hoping in the expanded versions we get later, we see more and more of that unfolding as the game progresses. There's also interactable stuff you can mess around with in combat, like one of the opening main encounters sees you pushing over a pillar to end the fight. There are traps and things on the ground. Hopefully you'll be able to set some of those up yourself, which may be in here already. I didn't specifically go looking for it, to be honest. And then the other thing combat-wise I wanted to talk about was a little bit about the subclasses. So where this game is mostly 5e D&D, rules is written, 2024 rule set though, there is homebrew stuff in there, and a lot of that homebrew is stuff like the subclasses. One of the ones I was excited to mess around with and specifically made was the Ether Warden Fighter subclass, where they are basically like a Constitution caster that gets access to some good spells to sort of give you that battle mage type of character fantasy. And then even some of the like sorcerer subclasses were really cool as well, being like straight up damage additions or messing around with like weapon attacks a little bit, that kind of thing. So with the level cap being 4, I cannot fully explore those things, but I will say just here, first impressions wise, I have liked what I've seen, what they've done with some of those specific homebrew subclasses, I guess you could call them. And I wanted to point that out here. The ones that I was most interested in trying out, I did try out, and they are in fact a good time. So kind of bringing all of that together to start wrapping this video up, Solasta 2 Early Access seems like a pretty good time. This is a promising start. There's a lot more to come in terms of like content additions, things to test out, see how they actually pan out in reality. But this is exactly the direction and like steps I was hoping they would take. This feels good to play. It's a big step up from Solasta 1, and while it is not, Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of like reactivity and interaction with the environment, etc., they are definitely much more on the tactical side of things. So bear that in mind. Otherwise, I'm having a great time with this, and I'm excited to see it shape up throughout its early access period, which is where we are going to leave this video, which I certainly hope you enjoyed. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.